This workshop is co-organized by the UNFCCC and ESCAP in collaboration with the UNDP and ILO. This regional workshop follows the same similar workshop that were conducted last year in Latin American, Caribbean region, and African region. As the title suggests, this workshop focuses on the topics of impact assessments, the use of the tools for impact assessment, just transition, and economic diversification. For the next 3 days, we will be listening to experience from countries in these topics from which we can learn. We will be interacting with each other and discussing issues related to these topics. And importantly, we will be having hands-on exercises that aim at enhancing our understanding in these topics. Without further delay, at session 1 of the workshop, we will have the collaborating organizations to give some brief opening remarks. First, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Kusum Lata, team leader in Impact Assessment Unit of the UNFCCC. Kusum, you have the floor.
Pleasure and honor to be here today in this country, Bangkok, representing my organization, and also to welcome all of you who have flown from your own countries to come here and participate in this meeting. Welcome to all of you. I would like to welcome Sang Min Nam, who is Director, Environment and Development Division from ESCAP. I would like to welcome Sangji Lee from Climate Change and Green Economy, who is a technical specialist from UNDP. I would like to also welcome Ken Kamua Shawa from ILO, who is representing ILO in absence of another colleague who was also supposed to be here, but he is flying from Geneva office and having some delays in reaching here. I would also like to welcome Peter Govindaswamy, who is sitting next to me, representing KCI co-chair and also representing Singapore as a party here. Distinguished delegates and other participants from other international organizations who are also present here in this room right now. On behalf of the UNFCCC Secretariat, I would like to welcome all of you to this workshop. Dear participants, all of you as a party delegate or as a contributor to climate change actions have recognized that understanding of impacts of implementation of mitigation policies or actions, which are commonly known as response measures as well, plays an important role in contributing efforts to achieve Paris Agreement goals. All these mitigation actions which you are taking in your own country cannot be implemented sustainably and in a just manner without the understanding and addressing the adverse impacts of these policies and actions. The importance to assess, account short, medium, and long-term macroeconomic impacts of both physical impacts from climate change and also from transition policies, which includes impacts on growth, inflation, and unemployment, was identified as one of the critical aspects by some countries who just met under G20 last week. With this recent recognition and the work which has been under UNFCCC convention, going by the principle that everything which has to be managed also has to be measured. Developing countries have consistently requested for enhancing their capacity to use the modeling tools which can inform their respective climate change policies in terms of planning or to support implementation of these climate policies as well in a manner that it facilitates this transition or economic diversification. With this aim of facilitating support to developing countries on these aspects, the COP27, CMP17, and CMA4, which was last COP, requested UNFCCC Secretariat to organize a regional workshop. In addition, it also requested that UN Climate Change Secretariat to, while noting national circumstances differ, conduct peer-to-peer learning where possible to facilitate planning implementation of effective policies And in which areas? Again, in the area of just transition of workforce and creation of decent work and quality jobs, and also on economic diversification and transformation, which focuses on challenges and opportunities for implementation of low greenhouse gas emission policies and strategies towards achievement of sustainable development. So knowing these different mandates which has come on request from different parties who are representing all of you in climate change convention secretariat, climate change negotiations, uh, we are being mandated to undertake this work, and we are delivering this workshop in that to deliver on those mandates. On this aspect, I would like to say that effective policy making, we all have to work together to have a transition which can improve jobs and livelihoods and can strengthen economic resilience for all of us. We all need to assure together that no one is left behind, and we also have to should not create a situation that any country has to choose between development objectives or fighting for climate change. And all these aspects can only be ensured if we know what are the impacts of our mitigation policies and actions and how they can be addressed or minimized. In coming days, this is a very small attempt where all of us will learn from each other how to design just transition policies or economic diversification policies based on experiences which all of you has brought together from your country experience and here can share with each other. In addition, we plan to undertake some hands-on exercises in order to use these impact assessment tools to analyze and impact domestic and global climate change mitigation policies. We hope that all of you will share your experiences in policy planning, any experience on the ground, gauge how the modeling tools can be used in your national context and NDC commitments implementation. Some of you might be more advanced than others. And in this context, this platform provides an opportunity to further allow to internalize what will be optimal need or use of modeling tools in your own national context. We really appreciate that all of you are committed yourselves in making yourself available for this workshop. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kusum. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Sangmin Nam, Director at ESCAP. Sangmin, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, distinguished participants. It's really my pleasure to welcome you to this regional workshop in Bangkok on behalf of UNESCAP. Also, we are very pleased to support UNFCCC, UNDP, and ILO in organizing this important workshop. So let me speak about some of our process, ESCAP's process with regard to climate action. The ESCAP held its 79th commission session in May under the theme of Accelerate Climate Action with the following themes. First, the impact of climate-induced disasters. Asia-Pacific region is most vulnerable to climate change as it is home to 6 out of top 10 countries most affected by climate-related disasters during the last 2 decades. Secondly, regional contribution to global GHG emissions. The region accounts for almost over half of global emissions, and regrettably, its emissions continue to rise, with its global share also increasing. Thirdly, countries are showing great commitments to climate action, with 80% of regional countries announcing carbon neutrality or net zero target. In this regard, the region needs to scale up and accelerate joint efforts to initiate immediate and substantial reductions in GHG emissions to achieve a national net zero target and stay with the 1.5 degree pathways. This necessitates a rapid low carbon transition in key sectors, including energy, industry, and transportation sector. Such a transition also presents an opportunity to enhance economic competitiveness in a new low carbon economy that we are expecting. Also, the technical report of the first global stocktake, which was released last week, underscores the imperative need for radical decarbonization across all sectors of the economy and whole of society approach to design and implement systemic transformations. But history also shows us that adverse impacts during industrial or economic system transition, when traditional structures are replaced by new industries, the benefits and drawbacks of these changes are unevenly distributed among different groups of society. While many such impacts have been localized in the past, we now must pursue and expedite global scale transition within the next 20, 30 years, encompassing all major economic sectors. The impacts of our climate action will extend beyond any single societal sector or country jurisdiction, implicating other societies and countries in the consequences. Therefore, managing the transition to be equitable in terms of both process and outcome is critical to enable the transition itself. This also requires forecasting, assessing, and addressing potential negative impacts, which are the primary objectives of this workshop. Forecasting and assessing these impacts should be also tailored to the national context. The transition has different implications and requires differentiated approaches between countries, whether high income or low income, countries with a heavy manufacturing sectors or service industries, or those with varying dependencies on fossil fuels for their economy or energy. Thus, forecasting and assessing impacts should be closely aligned with each country's specific situation and enabling them to be better prepared for managing the transition in a just way. In this regard, I hope this workshop serves as a great opportunity to support the national efforts towards this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sang-Min Nam. Now, from UNDP, I will give the floor to Ms. Sang-Ji Lee, Climate Change and Green Economy Technical Specialist. Sang-Ji, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sang-Ji Lee. I'm from the UNDP headquarters, based in New York, working on the just transition, NDCs, and green economy. I would like to first start by thanking the UNFCCC and UN ESCA for hosting this important workshop, and very happy to join the forces with the ILO, our long-standing partner, to facilitate this important regional workshop. I'm going to be very short. Welcome, everyone, of course. As part of the UNDP's Climate Promise Initiative, our team has been supporting more than 125 countries in designing and implementing their short-term and long-term climate pledges called NDCs and LTS. And from our analysis, we have seen more and more countries asking support on how to measure the socioeconomic impacts of the transitions and how do they determine the best transition pathway going to a net zero future. In this context, we believe this regional workshop will be very useful, and hopefully that we will have a very fruitful discussion today in this room, so we can also hear from other approaches, what are the other enabling environments that is required for such impact assessment, and how can we really take these findings forward. So we're very happy to join these forces. So thank you again for the distinguished participants and again the host for organizing this workshop. And then we wish you a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sang-Ji. Now from the ILO, we have Mr. Ken Chamuvashawa, Senior Economist, who will give the opening remarks from ILO. Mr. Ken, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Ken Shawa. I'm the senior economist, but also the head of the Regional Economic and Social Analysis Unit for Asia and Pacific for the ILO. I would like to welcome everyone to this very, very important meeting, distinguished delegates, colleagues from the United Nations and the broader Matlatlu system, ladies and gentlemen, we all agree that the theme that we have today is of importance and great urgency. I therefore am very happy to be with you today at this important forum. The far-reaching impacts of climate change on the world of work and economies at large have become clearer and felt across world regions. In our own region here, we know that in many ways we still depend on fossil fuels. We also know our vulnerability in terms of climate change effects, particularly in the Pacific. The impacts of climate change undermine progress on SDGs, progress on poverty reduction, and any meaningful sustainable development. What we need is decisiveness and ambition, action, action, action that is needed now. And moving our economies to net zero generates opportunities for economic growth and employment for that matter. It also, however, presents challenges. And these challenges include job and income losses in some sectors. What does this mean? This means that equitable income outcomes will not be produced by default. They will not fall from the air, from the sky. They must be ensured by design. So delivering a just transition promotes environmentally sustainable economies in a way that is inclusive by creating decent job opportunities, reducing inequalities, and by leaving no one behind, which is the tenet of our SDG agenda. And ensuring just transition is imperative to enable ambitious climate action. A just transition builds broad-based consensus for bold and rapid responses, unlocking the potential for inclusive development on a healthy planet. It was in June at the 111th International Labour Conference where representatives from governments, workers, and employers from 187 member states discussed how to accelerate efforts towards a just transition. They endorsed the ILO guidelines for a just transition as the central reference for policymaking and basis for action, and they articulated a shared understanding of a just transition. It is in this regard, distinguished guests, that the ILO stands ready to leverage its expertise on just transition policies to further cooperate with governments, social partners, development partners, and everyone of goodwill. Distinguished guests, today's meeting, this gathering that wants to assess the impacts of the implementation of response measures and developing climate policies for just transition and economic diversification is therefore very, very timely. The ILO believes that the notion that there will be no jobs on a dead planet is more than ever relevant today. The heat waves characterizing our continent, with impacts on labor productivity, with impacts on occupational safety and health, is always a reminder of the urgency to tackle climate change. This is why, distinguished colleagues, ILO's work to support ambitious climate action and advance social justice is through a just transition as an enabler of both mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Distinguished guests, we are happy that through the Priority Action Program on Just Transition, the ILO will engage in the following initiatives and actions at the COP28. The first one is the Just Transition Pavilion. So at COP27 in Egypt, the ILO established for the first time a COP Just Transition Pavilion and expects to set up a similar pavilion at COP28. The pavilion will provide a space to convene events, engage in formal exchanges, and develop partnerships, which are key in this fight. The pavilion is a partnership between the ILO, the European Commission, the UN Climate Change Secretariat, IOE, and ITUC. There's also the high-level dialogue on delivering a gender-responsive just transition for all. COP27 mandated the ILO to organize a one-day high-level discussion at COP28 to highlight the nexus between climate change and action, gender equality, inclusion, and the world of work. On 3 December, the ILO will host a high-level dialogue on delivering a gender-responsive just transition for all. The outcome of this event will be important in informing the Gender Equality Day on the 4th of December. We're also happy to report that we'll be launching the ILO Islamic Development Bank report on green jobs in the MENA region. This joint regional study by the ILO and the Islamic Development Bank will present scenarios of decarbonization in the MENA region with their potential implications on employment and the advancement of social justice. There are many initiatives arranged to show our interest and commitment at the COP28, but in the fight of the effects of climate change in general. I would like to wish you fruitful deliberations, but I want to emphasize the importance of evidence-based policy making, which I believe is key in combating climate change. It is in this regard that I have trust and belief that this regional workshop for Asia and the Pacific will trigger important interventions in the fight against the adverse effects of climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. Now, to give the final opening remark, I would like to invite the co-chair of KCI, Mr. Peter Govindasamy. You have the floor, Peter.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Peter Govindasamy, one of the members of the KCI. First, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of my fellow colleagues, Professor Mao, Osman, Ari, and of course our former member, Ali from Maldives. Good to see you. Before I give my opening remarks, very brief ones, I just want to fully agree with the comments that our colleague from ILO just mentioned. Ambition is needed, action is needed. Action is needed not only to address to have climate ambition, but action is also needed to address the impacts. I think he highlighted that point very clearly. We need to do this urgently. Second point, which is very important, which is why we are here, is the need for evidence-based work and solutions. So with that, let me just very briefly highlight 8 points on which I believe all of us can agree from a party perspective. First, all of us can agree that climate is the greatest sustainable development challenge of our age. For many small islands, climate change is existential. Second, we also can agree that climate mitigation ambition is necessary for parties to meet the Paris Agreement's 1.5-degree goal. Third, we can also agree with the Paris Agreement that parties may be affected not only by climate change, but also by impacts of measures taken in response to climate change, meaning response measures will have implications. Fourth point that we all can agree that the impacts can be positive or negative. I think we can also agree that the impacts can be domestic or cross-border. And six, we can also agree that as in any economic transition, there will be winners and losers in the energy transition. 7, we can also agree that we cannot stop at recognizing that people are going to be affected in the energy transition. If the negative impacts are not adequately addressed and fully addressed, Would people be incentivized to support climate ambition? Without strategies to effectively handle the impacts, wouldn't there be potential risk of societal backlash? Eighth point that we all can agree on the need to address impacts. The conversation of impacts cannot take place in a vacuum. As Kusum highlighted earlier, what cannot be identified cannot be addressed. So therefore, the first step would be to ascertain the scale of impact and who would be affected. This is essential for more targeted, tailored, and effective remedies. Hence, the need for quantitative and qualitative assessment methodologies to accurately determine the impact of mitigation actions or energy transition on indicators such as GDP, employment, and income distribution. We also need to undertake capacity building efforts to enable parties. And I like to highlight, especially for developing countries, to use these tools. And in this regard, I think this workshop is very important. But let me just end up. I highlighted that what cannot be measured cannot be addressed, and that's where the KCI plays a role. The KCI seeks to fill this gap through our 6-year work program on 4 work program items: economic diversification and transformation, and energy transition, and the creation of decent work and quality jobs, assessing and analyzing the impacts of implementation of response measures, and last but not least, facilitating the development of tools and methodologies to address the impacts of the implementation of response measures. So the KCI is here. Our role, our raison d'etre is to work with all of you to address the impacts, analyze, so that we can also support climate ambition. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. With that, we have concluded the opening session. Before we delve into the technical sessions, I would like to invite everyone to take a family photo. And with this, I will now give the floor to my colleague Banashri Bani, who will inform us where we will take the picture and who will give us some more information on logistical matters. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Banashri Sinha Bani from the Senior Climate Change Specialist from RCC Bangkok, or the Regional Collaboration Center for Asia and Pacific. Let me start a little bit with the agenda. I believe all of you have received day 1 agenda, so we plan to share it day by day. By end of today, you will be receiving the agenda for day 2, and then we will be sharing with you also the agenda for day 3. For the breakout groups, we plan to organize it in this room itself. As we move further into the day, you will be provided information around the breakout groups by the moderators and our colleagues here. Coming to the breaks, for coffee breaks, we are organizing the coffee breaks just outside the room. For lunch, you may find there are 2 options for you, one on the ground floor, and there's one option on this floor itself, which is the cafeteria, and it's around the escalator area, the middle area. For people who would be interested for prayers, ESCAP in the UNCC, we do have a prayer room. You have to go a level higher than this and then turn to the right towards the end, rightmost, you will find the prayer room. Coming to DSA, I think my colleague Mary over there, she's handling all those issues, so please get in touch with her. Regarding other issues, as already mentioned in the email, you will find refill stations. You will find the refill stations for refilling your water bottles. Plastic water bottles are not allowed in the UN Conference Center, so we would really encourage you to bring your own water bottles and refill. In case you don't have, you will, as you step out of the room, you will find a refill station corner there, or also drinking station just on your right as you go outside this room and use the stairs to go down. Coming to food and drinks, it's not allowed here, so please do not bring in your foods or coffee or drinks into this room. Regarding time management, we have to wind up our day by 4:30. That's our plan. So it's a kind request to all the speakers, all the session moderators to please stick to time so that we are able to finish our sessions by 4:30. And then finally, it's photo time now. So can I request all of you to come here? We will be taking a photo here, and then we will move outside a bit. We would try to capture our all smiling, cheerful group today in 2 or 3 different places. Thank you.
Good morning. Let's start session 2, which is on the role of evidence-based policymaking in planning ambitious mitigation actions, including long-term LEDS, focusing on economic diversification and just transition in Asia Pacific. So could I request the speakers, Tamim from Saudi Arabia and Mr. Iqbal Hussein from Bangladesh to the podium. We have one more speaker, Renzi Panda from PNG. She's on her way now. Okay, good morning. We'll begin now. As I mentioned, we are waiting for Renzi from PNG to make her way here. So let's begin. As I highlighted, this session is about the role of evidence-based policymaking in planning ambitious mitigation actions, including LEDS. It focuses on economic diversification and just transition Asia Pacific. So today we have interesting speakers from countries representing different circumstances. So in this regard, it's also good to give us a broad spectrum of views. So without further ado, can I now first pass the floor to Muhammad Iqbal Hussein, Director, Field Administration, Department of Environment of Bangladesh. Iqbal, you have the floor.
Thank you. Respected co-chair in this session, dear participant, official of UNCC, good morning to all. This is Iqbal Hussein, Director Environment, Department of Environment, Khulna, Bangladesh. My subject is the role of evidence-based policy Making in planning ambitious mitigation action, including NDCs or LTE, LEDs, focusing on economic diversification and just transition in Asia Pacific. Especially I discuss about the Bangladesh. Here, evidence-based policy, EPPM, what is it? Some characteristic or definition is included here. The process of using high quality information to inform decisions that are made about government policies. This is a concept in public policy that advocates for policy decision to be guided or influenced by rigorously established objectives, evidence. Let's continue. Some characteristics involves the systematic collection of high quality data and analysis of those data with the rigorous research methods, which creates evidence or which decision can be based. Sorry. Involves the systematic collection of high quality data, analysis of those data with rigorous research methods, which creates evidence on which decision can be based. Evidence-based policy making process. At first, problem identification, then policy analysis, strategy and policy development, and policy enactment, and policy implementation. Nationally determined contribution NDCs to be achieved the target under the agreement. The number must submit a target themselves in accordance with the Paris temperature goal. Initially, these targets are called intent nationally determined contribution, and we are covered in NDC when the country ratifies the agreement. They continue to achieve the target under the agreement. Two member countries must submit it to target themselves in accordance with the to achieve the target under the agreement. The member countries must submit it It is central to achieve the goal of reaching net zero emission, limiting warming, and preventing the worst impact of the climate change. LT-LEDs background and importance. LT-LEDs are qualitative in nature and are a requirement emanating from the 2050 Paris Agreement. Hereby, countries explain how the transition economics behind the achieving near the NDC target. It signifies their path towards the larger climate objective of cutting emission by 45% by 2030 and achieving the net zero around 2050. It is visible-led, unifying and place-based set of principles, process, and practice the build economic and political power to shift from a extractive economy is a regenerating economy. Gaining the economy is a way that is a fair and inclusive as a possible, and everyone concerned, creating the decent work opportunities and leaving no one behind. Just transition, what is means here the extractive economy and regenerative economy here describes. Evidence-based policy making, LTDS, just transition, and some facts. Seventh fastest growing country, economic country of the world. Other side, the Bangladesh, seventh most climate vulnerable country of the world, has dropped and working on several resilient plans for policies, including UN SDGs Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100, National Environment Policy 2018, National Action Plan for clean cooking 2002 to 2030, forest and carbon inventories, and tree plantation, etc. That's some of the challenge, having a unique geographical location, delta, dominance of greater floodplains, low elevation from sea level, high population density, highly dependent on nature. River bank erosion and saline water intrusion, dots, lack of environment conservation, technologies, and sufficient fund, etc. Bangladesh submitted INDCs to even FCCs on 25th September 2015, covering three sectors. Three sectors are power, industry, and transport. Target is to limit the global warming 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade by 2013. Subsequently, NDC implementation roadmap and action plan was submitted in 2018. INDC was based on the 2011, which proposed the reduction of greenhouse gas emission, unconditional reduction of 12 million ton carbon dioxide, total of 5%, a conditional reduction of 24 million ton carbon dioxide, total of 10%, supported by business as usual 2 years target within 2030. NDCs are updated following IPCC guideline, updated NDCs including national sectors, additional sectors, energy, used in transport, industry, residence, and all commercial, agriculture, gas emission, etc. Industrial process and product uses, IPPU, agriculture, forestry, and other land uses and waste. Sector-wise analysis updated NDCs, power, transport, industries, household, brick clean. Here, sector analysis updated NDCs, sector-wise greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide emission data, energy, 93.09% million ton, and percentage 55.07. Agriculture, forest, and other land uses, 46.24, and percentage 27.35%. Waste at 24.11, total percentage 14.26, IPPU 5.61, waste percentage 3.32%. As per business as usual, total greenhouse gas emission in 2030 will increase to 2.4 times than the base year. Base year was 2011. Total emission will be 409.4 million tons. Greenhouse gas emission rise will be highest in energy sector, which I previously included there. Bangladesh greenhouse gas reduction strategy by 2030. Bangladesh unconditionally plan to reduce 27.56 million ton, total of 6.73 greenhouse gases emission below business as usual levels. Sector energy reduction amount 26.3 million ton. Agriculture, forest, and other land uses 0.64 million ton, with percentage 2.3%. Waste 0.6 million ton and percentage 2.2. Bangladesh conditionally plans to reduce further to 61.9 million tons, total 15.12 greenhouse gas emission below business as usual levels. Energy 59.7 million ton, with percentage 96.46%. Agriculture, forest, and other land uses with a reduction amount 0.4 million ton, percentage 0.65%. Waste 1.84 million tons, percentage 2.97%. Evidence-based learning that reflect in the policy. Research data and local people's uses experience show that a special type of cooking stove called local name Bondhu Chula product less the greenhouse gases and similar environmental pollutants. About 4.5 million of such stoves with name Bondhu Chula, local name, are installed. Their result is described here. Very satisfied. The user are very satisfied 46%, satisfied 43.5%, not satisfied 0.2%, no dissatisfaction. So it is the very effect to the user of local people of Bangladesh. And we here is compare with the other chula that is stove. Reduce household uses by 65 to 78 kg per month per household. Fuel consumption before and after uses. Blue color and yellow colors. Yellow colors at present Bondhu Chula and other chula, other stove. Fuel wood 32%. Trees leaves 40%. And trace stove and jute is take for 43%. Dark 23%, and wooden powder 53%. Yeah. Here compare traditional stove and Bondhu Chula local name. Here easily compare which is better to the user. Evidence-based learning that affects in the policy, a transformation from traditional to improved modern cleans such as hybrid open clean, vertical shaft clean, auto tunnel clean, zigzag clean, that reduces greenhouse gas emission and air pollution. Experience and achievement, 72% traditional bricks clone replaced by modern clones. Traditional clones introduce more smoke, and modern clones less smoke clone. CNG driven vehicles replaced by the fossil fuel rate and on the major cities. The current NDC updated as the successor of INDC. Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan up to 2030. Here, very major thinking are included here. Ashram, shelter or homeless and landless people. National Solar Energy Roadmap 2021 to 2041. Bangladesh National Action Plan for Reducing Short-Lived Climate Pollutants. Energy Efficiency and Conservation Master Plan up to 2030. Promoting green technology. National Adoption Plan 2023-2050. Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund. Experience and achievement National Solar. Bangladesh is encouraging private sectors, financial organization, and investor to invest in green project with technical, regulatory, and financial assistance. Bangladesh is carrying micro, small, and medium entrepreneurs, self-employed youths, and lower skilled worker, particularly farmers and fishermen and climate migrate people in the climate threat-prone coastal region and participated to protect their jobs and livelihoods. Bangladesh is trying to best the make economy green and inclusive to concern everyone, creating decent work opportunities and livelihood behind to implement just transition. Thanks to all.
Thanks, Iqbal. Could I now turn to Tamim?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be back at Bangkok, and I would like to start off thanking Thailand and the government of Thailand of hosting us in this beautiful city of Bangkok, and also would like to thank the UNFCCC Secretariat, the ESCAP, the ILO, and the UNDP for collaborating on this very important topic on the impacts of implementations of response measures. So I'm going to start with the sharing the Saudi Arabia's national circumstances and the views of Saudi Arabia and our experience in implementing response measure and considering the impacts of response measures in on the international and the local conditions. Yes. So to start with the national circumstances, in Saudi Arabia, we have a harsh climate, and a sensitive ecosystem. This harsh climate has multiple effects on our biodiversity, and also with increasing temperature, we will have difficult in biodiversity loss and other plant species. We also have limited water resources. We also depend highly on desalinated water for our water needs. So addressing the climate change is very important to mitigate the impacts already in those sensitive ecosystem that we have. Also, emissions have came 12% from desalination in 2012. I just thought it's interesting just to put it here, just to have this fact here, just to have this idea regarding how can we at the same time adapt to climate change, but at the same time these adaptation can result also into different emissions, and we seek to address that also. As you know, probably in the room, Saudi Arabia is one of the largest oil producers in the country, and the majority of the budget and the revenues depend on one commodity. So we are vulnerable to certain commodity fluctuations in prices, and that will in return can affect our budget, revenue, jobs, people, and the socioeconomics for the population of the country. So we also have a young growing population in the country, which aspires to have great development and great future in finding job opportunities and improving job opportunities. So the vulnerabilities, as we can see, we have the physical, the economic, and the social vulnerabilities that are presented in here. To address Saudi Arabia's vulnerabilities arising from climate change and the impacts of addressing climate change. Of course, we need to start first about the emphasis on national circumstances and how national circumstances differ between and every country. Not one country is the same. There are challenges and opportunities, and also there is the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities with respective capabilities under the United Convention that really put an emphasis on differentiating between development and development levels. Of course, as Saudi Arabia is a leader in energy production, it has the global responsibility to sustain energy security and energy access and climate actions around the world, because energy is very important a commodity, and as Saudi Arabia is one of the largest producers for that commodity, it has the responsibility to also provide safe flow of energy products. Third, different mitigation strategies in the IPCC have shown that there is no one size that fits all. It all depends on national circumstances and strategies within the temperature goal. Also, we are striving to have an inclusive development in our country, and that inclusivity will be a key in mitigating the impacts that can result from international mitigation policies or domestic mitigation policies. Of course, we also follow a certain concept, which is, I'm going to elaborate more on it, on the circular carbon economy. But before we delve into the mitigation policies that the Kingdom is taking and the way, I would just like to have this brief on how the impacts of response measures should be taken by the parties under the convention. So in the first one, there are the parties, it mentions the parties shall give the full consideration to multiple elements and the specific and the needs and concerns of developing parties arising from the adverse effects of climate change and or the impact of implementation of response measures. Also, we have Article 3.5 that talks about the support of an open international economic system. And we also have 4.10 that discusses the particularity of single commodity development and countries who depend on fossil fuels for their economies. Also in the Paris Agreement, which talks about addressing the concerns of developing parties for addressing the response measures. In our NDC, we mention also that in understanding and assessing and addressing the impacts of response measures, we conduct socioeconomic studies on the impacts of mitigation policies. And these socioeconomic studies, mainly because we derive most of our revenue from exporting oil. So we have the modeling tools and the price ranges. How can that affect our budget and revenue in that regard? So it's easier for us because we already have an advantage into how one commodity can affect the whole impact. So we can see how international policies or domestic policies can be impact the society. Also, we have research and development of technologies to mitigate the impact of response measures, and also technology cooperation approaches for economic diversification. Carbon capture is one of the technologies that we are interested in. And also we have research into understanding the long-term impacts of response measure on market stability and to develop certain strategies to maintain those the market stability. So as one of the themes that we have in response measures, as all of us know, is economic diversification. And for Saudi Arabia, a key important part for economic diversification is having a key important part for implementing climate policies is its economic diversification plan and how it is implemented. So we have adopted in 2016 our economic diversification plan, like the latest one, Vision 2030, which is basing it on 3 pillars: a vibrant society, a thriving economy, and ambitious nation. So with this economic diversification, we have certain programs that cascade around all multiple levels of government and the different institutions and ministries that are responsible to it. With this economic diversification, we aim to have the co-benefits that has been decided in previous decisions under the UNFCCC regarding the role of economic diversification. We have economic diversification with co-benefits in terms of greenhouse gas emissions avoidance, reduction, and removal, climate adaptation with co-benefits, and managing the impacts of response measures, which is very crucial in this sense. And also, as we are keen to our sustainable development goals, and then we are trying to achieve them nationally, we have different policy levers that have certain mitigation impact that can reduce also the impacts that result from climate policies domestically or internationally. So we have energy efficiency program, one of the national energy efficiency programs in the country that seeks to retrofit buildings, incentivize populations to have energy efficient appliances. As we have this harsh climate ecosystem, we also depend on climate weather modification technologies such as air conditioning and that would cause also emissions if they are not utilized efficiently. We have a renewable energy target of 50%. By 2030, which is a very ambitious target. Currently, we run our electricity generation in different sources. So with that, we really aim to have this target completed by 2030. And also the other 50% will be through gas. Also, we are utilizing our experience in carbon capture and storage and utilization to have these technologies sustain our economic development and also achieve the Paris Agreement goals and the UNFCCC of having a balance between carbons and sinks. Also, hydrogen is a hot topic now. We've seen a large interest internationally on hydrogen, and we seek to become a global leader in that regard of hydrogen. We are investing heavily in research and information, and this all leads to mitigating also our topic, mitigating the socioeconomic impacts that could result from international or domestic response measures. So also we have our methane recovery and flare minimization, methane management, and it is very crucial also because methane has a greater global warming potential, which have stronger short-term effects into our impacts. So getting those quick wins of reducing our methane emissions is crucial for achieving the Paris Agreement. So in our NDC, we clearly state that the management of response measures is the building block for implementing our climate targets. So our updated INDC target aims at avoiding 278 million tons per CO2 equivalent by 2030. The previous target, which was in Paris Agreement, was around 178 million. So this is more than doubling of the previous target that we had. Also, the ambition is contingent on the economic and the social consequences of international climate change policies and measures that do not disproportionate abnormal burden on the kingdom economy. So in Saudi Arabia, we also have introduced the circular carbon economy, an approach that we believe that it is holistic, inclusive of all options and solutions that are available to mitigate and address climate change, and also to mitigate the impacts that results from climate policies on our economy. So in managing our emissions, there is the linear economy that has you produce and then you combust and then you release CO2 in the air. In a circular carbon economy, you produce, combust, and then you could capture. You could reuse it also for food and beverages and also cement building, also in cement material. Also, you could recycle it into carbon to polymers, chemicals, carbon to fuels, also carbon to other materials. And then you could also remove that through direct air capture and using of the geological storages as indicated in the IPCC. Like IPCC, I believe, indicated that it is unavoidable to reach 1.5 without the utilization of carbon capture and utilization storage, especially in hard to abate sectors. So we see technology is a very important theme in that regard. Also, the circular, more elaboration on that, focuses on the 4 Rs: reduce. So we could reduce our emission through energy efficient technologies and alternate fuels, and the amount of carbon entering in the atmosphere. We could reuse those carbon, and we see value in utilizing carbon emissions by capturing carbon through innovative technologies, and we recycle again as indicated, and we remove from air. Also, the CCE is also comprehensive of nature-based solutions, not only contingent on certain technologies. So we also have multiple initiatives regarding reforestation and mangroves in the kingdom. It is also important noting that the circular carbon economy had been adopted through the G20 framework in 2020, and it's been recognized as a voluntary, holistic, and integrated, inclusive, pragmatic, and complementary approach to promote economic growth. Also, the kingdom, aside from the what I previously mentioned, have introduced other initiatives regarding clean hydrogen, being the world leading producer and exporter of clean hydrogen by 2030, using captured carbon to produce chemicals and synthetic fuels. And also we have city strategies of sustainability and planning for Riyadh and Al Ula. And also we have joined the Global Methane Pledge to reduce global methane emissions. We've also announced in 2023 establishing a carbon capture and sequestration company that has the target to capture 44 million metric tons by 2035 target and 9 million tons annually by 2027. Also, not only on the national level, and we also, in order to reflect back on our topic. Also, we have exhibited leadership in the region regarding climate actions, and we wanted to showcase our national strategies and regional work in tandem with the COP. So if you have noticed attending the previous COPs, there has been always certain high-level meetings, events regarding regarding the Middle East Green Initiative. One of the targets is planting 50 billion trees in the Middle East. Also launching clean fuel solutions for cooking, a region of it, and the Circular Carbon Economy Fund. Also collaborate to accelerate the implementation of the Circular Carbon Economy Framework. And also we will be hosting the next MENA Climate Week in October 2023. Also, some of the initiatives that we have nationally as Saudi Green Initiative and the Middle East Green Initiative is reduce emission, become hydrogen, as I've mentioned, like the leader producer in hydrogen. And also we have launched one of the projects to have the biggest parks for the implementation in Riyadh. So tying this all back to our the role of economic diversification. So if you have noticed, I started the premise of my presentation with managing response measures. So if we want to implement our national plans and we want to implement our climate policies, it has to be contingent on our economic diversification plans and the long sustainability of our social and economic growth. At the same time, managing the impacts of response measures that could arise globally and domestically drives our implementation of the climate policies. Also, I've mentioned regarding the circular carbon economy and its approach in addressing emission while generating value. Emphasizing the need for regional and international cooperation in implementing and assessing climate policies, and further assessing and addressing and understand the impacts of response measures is the key as one of the building blocks of implementing our NDC. And with that, I would like to end and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tamim, for that very comprehensive sharing. Both Iqbal and Tamim reflect the starting premises, national circumstances, countries which are differently situated. But one thing is constant: there's going to be impacts from climate ambition, and there's a need to address these impacts urgently. So once we talk about ambition, we also need to talk about ambition in terms of addressing the impacts. And I like the emphasis provided on economic diversification, because the more diversified a particular economy, the more it is able to absorb the shocks from climate ambition. So the floor is open. I'd like to hear your thoughts too. Any questions to the speakers or any comments on the presentations, very important presentations that they have made. The floor is open. We have about 10 minutes or so. Ali, you have the floor.
Yes, good morning and thank you all. Thank you, both the presenters for that very insightful presentation. Tamim, in your presentation, you mentioned that one of the problems in that little triangle with, you call it trilemma. I mean, I forgot the term. So can you put a bit more elaboration on what that entails, why it is a problem, and how it's connected to what you have presented?
Thank you, Ali. for your question. Most certainly. Of course, we have seen certain dilemmas and trilemmas, as you've mentioned, in regard to energy. And with many of the crises around the world, global crises, we cannot predict certain impacts on our economy and our. So I'm tying this with the global challenges, not necessarily energy accessibility nationally or domestically. My intention with that slide having that global responsibility to provide secure energy access to people, because there has been statistics around 600 million, they lack the access to energy of this state around the world, or even more than that. And it's our responsibility also to highlight the topic of energy poverty around the world, also that many countries don't that many countries faces. So that's my intention with this diagram. And also we have to acknowledge also the impacts rising from climate change, also of increasing temperature around that. So in that diagram, I wanted to highlight both of the trade-offs that could arise also from certain, and think more about a holistic overview rather than just to focus on one element in our dealings with climate change. So thank you for your question.
Thanks, Tamim. Usman, followed by Eri, then Prof. Mo.
Thank you, dear Peter, and thank you, Tamim and Iqbal, for your excellent presentation and very informative one. I just have one question regarding the impact of your economic diversification plan in terms of socioeconomic impact on your GDP, for example. Have you done a kind of modeling to see how these measures will impact your economy in terms of GDP growth or okay. And same question for Iqbal. Have you make a kind of assessment of the future impact of your measures on your economy? Thank you, in terms of sustainable development.
Thanks, Iqbal. Sorry, Osman, sorry. Eri, followed by Prof. Mo.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to take the floor. And let me just say thank you to the presenters as well. Quite an impactful presentation. I just have a question for Bangladesh. So noting that you mentioned that, you know, in policy, well, based on experience, that I think it's the Bunda Chula stove and also the brick kiln. The numbers was 4.5 million you said were installed. This was a stove, and for the brick kiln, approximately 72% were converted from the traditional over to the modern kiln. Just a curious question. What sort of policies did the government implement, and what was the impact on the society? For instance, were there concessions, grants, loans? What sort of, I guess I'm asking, if all of the cost was bore by the population, or did the governments sensitize some of this cost?
Prof. Mo.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you for this two presentations. My first question would be for Bangladesh colleagues. I think Bangladesh is one of the LDC country, and I think from a per capita GDP point of view, it's not a rich country. Since now you are facing, economic development as well as addressing climate change, maybe some other environmental issues. So my question is, how do you coordinate these two matters? Is there any kind of development plan which can accommodate the two, targets simultaneously, which means you have maybe some kind of sustainable development plan, a national plan, this kind of things to balance that, economic development as well as addressing environment issue and climate change issue. I think this is a big challenge for developing country, even for China. We are facing right now for a balance the two issues. Yeah, that's my first question. For second question for my dear colleague from Saudi Arabia, that is, I'm very much interested. Do you have any kind of simulation or development scenario about your energy sector? For China, we have proposed our carbon neutrality target in the year 2060. And in different research organization, we have very much clearly that the energy trend, development trend, which means structure will be continuing changing till to the year 2060. That is a very surprising scenarios, which is maybe in around 2050, that renewable energy will account for even 80 to 90% of the total energy consumption. So in that context, I don't think Saudi would like to go that scenario, but do you have that kind of scenario? Because I think that would be very huge challenge for just energy transition, and this is very much related with two things. One is response measure to your the impact of the response measure to your country, and what is the response measure to other country, because that is the dynamic changing trend changing way. Thank you. Thanks, Prof. Mo. Okay, can I pass the floor to the speakers to respond to the question? Iqbal, then Tamim.
Thank you for a nice question from Usman Shariful. You know that Bangladesh is a naturally climate prone country of the world. Present Prime Minister has got award 2050 Champion of the World, UNEP. So Bangladesh government established some initiative has taken to development the economy. You know that as a Bangladesh is a emerging tigers economy country and world seventh growing economic country of the world. Bangladesh, especially some riverian country of the world, some rivers, and every years flood and cyclones are occurred in this country. After then, the government has some initiative and to overcome this, and the GDP has day by day increasing. And Bangladesh government and some initiative adaptation and especially for the coastal area of Bangladesh, 1/4 area of coastal area of Bangladesh. And the people of this area, every year they're suffering from various calamities. Then Bangladesh government should initiative so that they can overcome these calamities and the economic growing. And in Bangladesh, last decade, GDP's growing rate is very high, almost 7.5. Last year, 6.3 or 4. After the Corona period, in this during of the Corona 19, Bangladesh economy GDP growing rate is very high, was very high. And other question, Bondhu Chula, Bangladesh Council for Scientific and Research Institute had researched the user of the rural area of Bangladesh, the user of fuel, others wood and others fuel, which is benefited to the user. The Bondhu Chula, here the losses, the temperature is very low, but other Chula, other stove, the losses, the temperature is very high. And air create no smoke. Bangladesh Council Scientific Research Institute has researched, and they found the research the temperature and the use of the fuel and other such as fuels, 70% is usable in this Chula, in this stove. So Bangladesh government maximum policy are taken from the evidence-based, especially for the rural area. You know that Bangladesh, the local institute, the grassroots level local institute, Union Porishad. When Bangladesh government enacted in the local government related law, they must taken from the evidence from the root level people of Bangladesh. So Bangladesh government already taken to use the friendly Chula, Bondhu Chula, and Bangladesh government enacted a proclamation, a law about these affairs. Thank you.
Thanks, Iqbal. Tamim?
Thank you for the questions. So I will have Osman's question first regarding economic diversification assessments and its impact on the economy. In fact, we do have these assessments in the country, but also we have seen that the economy has been booming and creating new sectors that weren't established before. One of these sectors are tourism. The tourism sector was not developed for such a long time in our economy. Now we started utilizing the tourism sector. We started establishing also mining industry also that wasn't developed previously. And also we establishing new sectors that haven't been developed. And this contributes to our employment. So we've had recently, the recent IMF report on Saudi Arabia indicates we have the most historic low unemployment rate on the national context from history. So we, in 2022, during COVID, our unemployment rate was 9.8. Today it's 4.8. And of course, this plan is not yet. There has been opportunities to implement certain big projects regarding multiple sectors, whether it was in the sports sector, whether it's in entertainment sector, whether it's in. So actually, economic diversification allowed us to mitigate the impacts more dynamically through that. And also one of the statistics is our government revenue has been reduced depending on our export commodity levels. So we have a huge decrease in that regard with instituting new domestic policies regarding developing an infrastructure for tax and developing all kind of diversification policies. So it is assessed, and at the same time, we pay keen attention to the social safety nets program that we also have in the country, as we realize domestic measures also might have impacts also on the most vulnerable populations. So there are programs that were designed to address the impacts from domestic measures. We also, regarding the question of Professor Mao regarding modeling scenario, yes, we do have modeling scenarios, but as I've previously said in the early of my presentation, because we are developed in the area of energy forecasting and the energy addressing energy issues. We also collaborate with the local think tanks, such as CAPSARC Research Institute, which is a leading think tank in energy studies that performs impact assessments, and they are available online also. With that, I believe I've answered both of the questions. So thank you so much for the question.
Thank you. We have time for perhaps one last question. Ali, sorry, Ali, then followed by a colleague from UNDP, right? Okay.
Yes, thank you. So 2 questions. So the first one to my colleague from Bangladesh. You mentioned, I was just more curious about what was how was the program of this Bandhu Chola's replacement, the shift took. So, I mean, partly Ari was also asking, how was the funding directed to the real users to switch the technology? Were they kind of provide with incentives? So what was the training programs? Maybe it might not need a whole lot of big training, but per se, but how was this program rolled out into the rural areas, especially on this, the use of the technology and the funding to purchase the equipment? So that's the first question. And the second question again to Saudi Arabia. I'm quite impressed, the progress, of course, which the Saudi has made in this area and I've seen that you mentioned about the, with the IPCC recommendation as well on this geoengineering and storage of carbon storage. And also you have mentioned in the presentation, there's a hub to be established. So I was wondering what's the level of this hub is going to work, because carbon sequestration and storage, I think it's in a very, I mean, maybe in 2 or 3 different places in the world at the moment, it's happening somewhere in, very cold European places. So is this hub is going to be, of course, that's going to bring a whole lot of technology development, human resource development, like contributing for the diversification. That's really good. So is this hub is going to be placed somewhere in the Middle East? And is the actual storage is going to happen in the Middle East, or is it just, planned at the moment, not with this level of detail, maybe? What's the scope in that? Thanks.
Thanks. Ali, colleague from UNDP.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would first like to remark of the Tamim's presentation of that was really, comprehensive, but at the same time, understanding about the Asian side, I would like to ask some of the question. The first one is, Tamim, you have mentioned that Sodia is actually coping to reach the 50% of the electricity generation with the renewable energy by 2030. So at first, what is the target that you see so far now the Sodia is standing on? Like we are just 7 years to go with 2030. So what is the actual target that you are standing at right now? And secondly, I would like to understand that how is Saudi is actually coping up with the challenge that being Saudi Arabia itself the center and has a central role in the gas and oil itself, how you are taking up the challenge that it may introduce once shift towards the renewable energy, uh, the challenge on the Saudi's economy at first. How do you see, is it a risk, or how you are coping up with this risk? Because if I talk about Pakistan, we understand that in Pakistan, for the transition towards the renewable energy is because the petroleum hikes, the price hikes in Pakistan has been a greatest push to move towards the renewable energy. But in Saudi, being the hub of the oil and gas, the resources are available. How you are taking it up, and how you are coping the challenge that might add to your economy. Thank you.
Thank you. So perhaps Iqbal, then followed by Tamim.
Thank you for lead question to Bondhu Chula. You know that Bangladesh mainly 60% people are live in rural area. Next 40% people are in urban area. The user, the member of the user is more than rural area in urban area to rural area. And the cooking, they are cooking in uses various fuel. But at first, the Department of Environment, Bangladesh, thinks the how will be protect the use and the losses of the fuel, which is straw or others wood and others leaves. The research found that the temperature of this cooking are maximum or losses. So how protect them? Then Bangladesh Council of Science Research Institute has researched with 6,000 households, and they found that the result which I described my presentation or previous question. And the Bangladesh government, especially fuel ministry, had taken some initiative to how to provide the Bondhu Chula to the rural area. Thus, Bangladesh government takes some initiative and enacted a law to use the Bondhu Chula in the rural area. Thank you.
Thanks, Iqbal. Tamim.
I could remember the question as yeah. First, I'll start with answering Ali's question regarding geoengineering and CCUS and CCS, the hubs. Yes, it's been announced in COP during COP. During the Saudi Green Initiative and the Middle East Green Initiatives that were held during the last COP, that there will be certain hubs in the Middle East region. And there has been research regarding the geological storage within the kingdom also. So there has been some research in that regard in Saudi Arabia, and that geological storage also is very much available in the country, speaking about Saudi Arabia. Also in the IPCC, it has been mentioned the geological storage that we have currently available in the whole in all countries are able to allow us to reach the 1.5 degree target of reaching to the Paris Agreement. So scaling up certain technologies and financing and removing the barriers surrounding those technologies could also, if I can tie it back again, address the impacts responding to response measures. So if removing the barriers to certain technologies can allow also different countries to chart its own development technologies and solutions. Regarding questions from Anela, thank you so much for your questions. Regarding the target, I don't have the information readily available regarding percentage-wise, but from my quick look, we have currently we have a 43 in 2021 we had 43 megawatt, but also that has been doubled and increased in the last 2 years, and there has been a lot of push towards renewable energy in the country also, and one of the reasons that cheap electricity generation that occurred around the world is some of the huge projects that we have initiated in the region and in Saudi Arabia. So renewable energy is also an important aspect of addressing climate change, also with the other solutions such as carbon capture, hydrogen, as we are technologically neutral due to also being considering all options that are available to the country, and also tying it back again to the topic, which is allows us to mitigate the socioeconomic impacts that could rise from the different policies. Yeah, regarding challenges of domestic measures and the shift to renewable energy. Of course, as any country, we also try to mitigate the impacts with the available solutions that we have. And as I've stated before, our policies that address climate policies are contingent on the long-term growth of our economy and the implementation of our development plans. So, yeah, thank you so much for your questions.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to thank Iqbal and Tamim for sharing the national experiences. I think it was a rich sharing. I don't plan to summarize the rich discussion, but just wanted to highlight 3 points. One of the consistent points that came up in the discussion is national circumstances matter. Countries are affected differently. And the second point, both speakers also highlighted that even as they take climate ambition, they also need to address the economic and social impacts of the impact of response measures. And the third point, I'd like to thank Tamim for also reminding us of all the provisions from the convention, Article 4.8, 3.5, 4.10, among others. I think it's a good reminder for all of us that we need to collaboratively implement and operationalize these provisions that were agreed so long ago in 1992. So thank you very much. So can I pass the floor to the Secretariat to provide guidance on the one next?
Thank you. Thanks to moderator in the speech.
A very good morning again to all of you. We are now moving to our session 3, which is the role of evidence-based policy making in planning ambitious mitigation actions, including long-term emission development strategies, which focuses on economic diversification and also on just transition in Asia Pacific region. And in this particular session, we have 4 presentations, one from Peter Govindaswamy, who is KCI co-chair and will be reflecting us on the work which has been done by KCI. Then we have another presentation from Sang-Ji Lee, who will present the perspective from UNDP. We have third presentation from Marek Hardorf, who is going to present the work which has been done by ILO in this area. And then we have a final presentation with Terapong from the ESCAP. Without further delay, because we are already late 5-7 minutes to start the session, I will hand over the floor to Peter. Peter, over to you.
Good morning. I'll do a very quick sharing on the work of the KCI. Is the slides up there? Okay. So again, I think is just right that we are focusing on the notion of evidence-based. I think we need evidence, as we discussed earlier. What cannot be measured cannot be addressed accurately. Next slide. Okay, so just very briefly, the KCI was established at COP24 to support the work of the forum. So the functions are summarized here, essentially to provide a platform to allow parties to share information, experiences, case studies, methodologies, and this is important with a view towards recommending specific actions. So we just don't speak. The sharing is a means to an end, and the end is to take specific actions. Second, we provide recommendations to the SBs on the actions with a view to recommending those actions as appropriate to the COP, CMP, and CMA. And as some of you know, in the past 2 COPs, the KCI actually had submitted specific recommendation on a number of activities to the forum, and the COP has adopted that, and we are in the process of looking at how we can implement those recommendations. Third, we provide concrete examples, case studies, practices in order to enhance the capacity of parties with a view to dealing with the impacts of implementing response measures. In this regard, the experiences shared by Saudi Arabia and Bangladesh earlier is very helpful. Next, we address the effects of implementing response measures in the convention, the KP, and the Paris Agreement. Next, we respond to and take into consideration relevant outcomes of different processes under the Paris Agreement. Last but not least, we promote actions to minimize the adverse impact and maximize the positive impacts of the implementation response measures. So the areas of work program, the 4 areas: economic diversification and transformation. And I just wanted to emphasize this. Recently, there's been a lot of discussion on just transition, but we should not forget that economic diversification is equally important. We also assess and analyze the impacts of response measures and facilitate the development of tools and methodologies to assess the impacts. So we have a 6-year work plan with 11 activities related to the 4 areas of work program. So this is in a diagrammatic fashion, highlighting the 4 areas, and the 4 areas actually complement each other and feed into each other. So these are the policy recommendations by the COP, the CMP, and the CMA for parties to, among others, invest in data collection, establish capacity building partnerships and networks. Next, undertake more in-depth analysis, quantifying the co-benefits, invest in the early planning of just transition policies that are inclusive and based on stakeholder engagement. Next, focus on relevant agencies, it is for them to enhance the support for addressing issues related to the assessment analysis of the impact of mitigation actions, including NDCs and LEDs, with a view to addressing the adverse impacts and maximizing opportunities. So I just wanted to emphasize this phrase. We need to maximize opportunities, and particularly key for developing countries. Next, enhance and develop the existing training frameworks and modules on assessment and analysis, so that this could be used for country-level training programs. Country-level training programs are imperative because, as we all agree, the national circumstances differ. Countries are affected differently. So there need to be country-level responses to country-specific impacts. Next, the mandate of the KCI, among others, is to facilitate the enhancement and capacity of parties to develop and use impact assessment methodologies. This workshop is one example of this. Next, the mandate to the KCI to conduct peer-to-peer learning to facilitate planning and implementation of effective policies on just transition and on economic diversification. So these are some of the publications that the KCI has submitted, and I invite all of you to read and internalize them. Particularly the third one on the implementation of just transition economic diversification strategies, compilation of best practices from different countries. This study, if I can just highlight, was actually cited quite widely, even as parties were discussing about the mandate from COP27 to develop a just transition work program. This highlights that the work of the KCI, over 10 years, we have been working on this just transition and economic diversification and the modeling tools. The fact that many parties refer to that highlight that what we are doing is relevant for the UNFCCC's work in addressing the impacts and analyzing the impacts of response measures. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, for keeping your presentation very succinct. That helps in managing the time. Next, I pass the floor to Sang-Ji Lee. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, again. My name is Sang-Ji Lee from the UNDP Climate Promise team. So all I'm going to present is based on the insights that we have gathered from supporting more than 120 countries in revising and updating their NDCs and also developing LTLADs. So I'm going to start with a bit of a very quick introduction and then go straight deep dive into the tools and methodologies. Yes. So the Climate Promise, I think many of your countries may be part of this initiative, but we have been supporting more than 170 countries in developing and updating their NDCs and also developing their long-term strategies. We provide your support in collaboration with more than 35 partners, of course, including UNFCCC, ILO here. That also represents more than 85% of all developing countries and represent over 25 global greenhouse gas emissions. So particularly on the role of evidence-based policymaking in NDCs and LTLADs, and why is it particularly important for the just transition? Before I go straight into that, I wanted to maybe share a bit of a snapshot of the global statistics. We are hearing a lot about just transition. I think colleagues have already mentioned in the previous sessions. We're seeing a growing momentum. More than 38% of the NDCs now make a direct reference to just transition. And this is more obvious in the long-term strategies, which makes sense because long-term strategies requires understanding of the structural changes, requires a long-term investment. However, if you look very closely at the just transition references, still the reference has been made at a very superficial level. There's not even many countries that have a dedicated chapter on just transition. And if you actually look at the next slides, many countries are now referring to job creation when they're talking about the just transition, for example, 70%, but not many countries actually include plans for economic diversification, which is very important to transition away from the fossil fuel industries. And they don't even include a lot of specific measures regarding the capacity building, upskilling, and so on. So a lot can be done as well. So why is it important then that we use the tools and methodologies to plan for our long-term strategies and nationally determined contributions called the NDCs? Because all this transition that we're talking about, unfortunately, have a distributional consequences. So if you look at this graph, actually taken from the ILO, you'll see the positive numbers, meaning signifies this is the positive employment gains when they're transitioning away from the fossil fuel and moving into a green economy by 2030. So you see that some of the jobs will be created in the solar power generation, hydros, but you also see some minus numbers here, minus figures in petroleum, electricity by coal. So this all means that not everyone is going to be the winner. There will be losers, as Peter has mentioned. And if we're not managing this transition very well, we've seen from the history that there will be a social protest unrest. We have seen from the Yellow Vest movement in France. And that entire thing will necessarily slow down the entire process of decarbonization. So understanding this transition pathway is important. So that was a global figure that I have shown you. But what is it for Asia Pacific? Every country has a different socioeconomic reality. We said there are a number of jobs that will be created in creating the solar PV. But would that be the case for Asia Pacific countries? We know that a lot of the just transition discussions are heavily revolved around the energy transition. So we had a lot of questions about Saudi Arabia in the earlier sessions. But transport is a very important greenhouse gas emission sector in Asia Pacific and also employs a lot of people. A lot of informal economies based on transport, especially in the Asia countries. So what about the seas, for example? We have Maldives, there are a lot of small island development states in the Asia-Pacific regions. It's not really the energy-based economy. It's not the fossil fuel-based economy. You'll see that they're heavily dependent on tourism. So they need to actually understand what will be the global ramification of the higher energy prices for these energy importing countries like the small island development states. They also have more necessity for human and technical capacity development support. So all these things have to be taken into account, and this is the baseline for starting a just transition journey, and the modeling and assessment that we will be learning throughout the session will help us understand this particular socioeconomic challenge faced by Asia Pacific region. So just to summarize very quickly, why is the evidence base so important for the climate policy? It is also very important because it brings the public along. We like the statistics with the numbers are very strong. There's a lot of great statistics that says by moving into the green economy by 2030, there will be a job creation potential of 24 million. But what does it mean for your country where the priority sector is different? But if you have this assessment and have the data that could potentially show the positive contribution to GDP, positive contribution to your employment, that will really make people to believe in this clean energy transition journey, and they will support this, not like the case of the Yellow Vest movement. And it also helps you to understand the distributional impacts, as I have mentioned. And why is this important? Because we're all working in a very limited fiscal space. You're all from the government. You know that fighting for the budget is always not an easy work. But modeling and assessment especially helps us to take the multidimensional approach. So countries can understand, okay, this measure is not only good for cutting the greenhouse gas emission, but it is also good in contributing to the social well-being, for the human development. It is also good for our economic growth. So it helps the countries to understand these trade-offs and synergies, and hopefully to prioritize certain actions that can contribute to those synergies. So in the end, basically, it helps the government to find the most suitable transition pathway, because there are different multiple transition pathways out there. So just to share some of the insights from the NDCs and LTS work, because that will be the anchor of the discussion. As I've said, there's many countries that are requesting support on assessment, many countries do energy modeling as a basis for LTS development and NDCs, but now countries also wanted to look at the socioeconomic impact assessment. How would that contribute to the skills development, economic growth, income generation, and so on? So it doesn't always have to be the socioeconomic assessment per se or the quantitative assessment. Many countries are also doing the cost-benefit analysis that could be also counted as an assessment. And some countries where they are very championing this gender agenda, they conduct a gender impact assessment. So it depends on the questions that you have, you can play around with different methodologies and tools. And that will help the countries to see clearly what will be the linkages of the climate action with the broader SDGs and other socioeconomic gains. So quickly on the UNDP's support, so what we're doing is we're continuing to support countries in developing and revising their NDCs and LTS. We want to integrate the just transition approaches as part of it rather than reinventing the wheel. So we have identified 4 key entry points. And you'll see that the assessment, the transition impact assessment, is one of the key building blocks we see is very important in countries' efforts to design and develop their NDCs. Just to show you the map, the number has gone up more. Currently, we support more than 34 countries in a specific just transition efforts, and you'll see that more than 50% of the countries are conducting transition impact assessment. So going straight into the transition impact assessment, I guess will be the main topic for discussion. Why do we need to have the transition impact assessment? Many colleagues have already mentioned, if you cannot measure it, you cannot really manage it. There's unfortunately a high level of uncertainty regarding the benefits and the cost of green transition. We're talking about 2050 pathway. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainties around that. And it is also not only about the quantitative, the sum cost of the transition, but also to do with the distribution of the cost and benefits among people. Is the benefits of the green transition be shared across the broad society? So these are kind of the questions that policymakers can have. And you need to have a very clear intention, because what any type of modeling and assessment has to be driven by the policy questions, not the other way around. So as part of this efforts, we've been providing the qualitative and the quantitative assessment, also working very closely with the ILO on these efforts. And you'll see this is the example of the Zimbabwe's green job assessment model that we have carried out. But you'll see that this is the total number of jobs that will be created with certain NDC intervention. But you can also have a disaggregated results, like how many jobs will be created for women, how many jobs will be created for informal labor and formal labor. So it helps countries to understand the distribution of impacts and also provide a targeted social protection measures. How this was used in the context of NDC, our colleague Mark can also attest to this, but we've done this as part of our exercise to support countries in setting their NDC targets. We've done that in Nigeria and Zimbabwe. So by providing the evidence based on this transition impact assessment, these 2 countries have specifically referenced just transition into their revised NDC that was submitted 2 years ago. It's a very rare cases that NDC specifically mentioned, have an entire chapter on just transition and have the findings of the green job assessment there. So it has actually made it to the policy, and not only it stopped there, now the countries are doing the implementation work. For example, in Zimbabwe, the green job assessment result shows that there is a very high potential of employment generation in the waste sector. And most of the beneficiaries are for young people. We understand the youthful population in Africa. So now they are building the new waste sectors and providing training to these young people. So this is how we're seeing the entire chain of the policy processes, starting from the evidence, policy reflection, and then the implementation. Can skip this. And here I wanted to also briefly mention some of the other building blocks that I have included in those quadrant that I've showed you, because all these assessment, as I have stressed multiple times, has to be driven by the people. Otherwise, you cannot really make sure that these findings are reflected in any policy measures or implementation. It will be just sitting at someone's house or in their desk. So the second part is the engagement. The social dialogue and stakeholder consultation is very critical. This is a part to help set the vision, because just transition means different things for different countries, so it can only be locally defined, and they can be the one who's asking the right question. You can just do assessment about what will be the potential pathway to go renewable by 2050. But if you are very much interested in the education or training, then you can have a very specific question on the training. What will be the skills required to reach the net zero by 2050? So having these broad-based stakeholders as part of this assessment and modeling is really critical. The third part is, of course, the accompanying policy, institution, and capacity building support. As colleagues have mentioned, to really meet the challenges of the green transition, countries must diversify their economies. They should build their relevant knowledges, and then sometimes it cannot be rescued, then some relevant interim social protection support has to be provided. So there's some examples where the countries are conducting or having this policy and enabling environment support. And all these things have to be also thought beforehand when the countries are thinking of doing this assessment, so that this can all go together. And of course, the last part is the finance, because all the things that I mentioned, whether it's a modeling, enabling environments, or stakeholder consultation, requires money. And in order to address the specific transition challenges, the finance has to come from both the public and the private sectors. So that really concludes my quick presentation, but happy to answer any questions. And thank you very much. I give the floor back to Kusun.
Thank you, Sanji, for introducing your support program and how it is really helping policymakers to get public support when they are implementing their actions. Listening to different contexts or some applications from Zimbabwe and Nigeria and how they have incorporated that in their NDCs, I would like to move now to our next presenter, who is Marek, who will be further complementing the work which UNDP is doing from the technical side. Marek, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Apologies for my voice. I'm just from the airplane from Geneva, so I haven't slept much. The title of my presentation is Designing Better Response Measure Policies. Although I'll talk about the Green Jobs Assessment Model, I want to stress the fact where Sanji left it, that the tool is supposed to help policy and not the other way around, right? So we obviously talk to policymakers here in this room, so the focus here should be policy making, although we need to understand the basics of the tool to help make policies better. So let me just give a quick outline of my presentation. First question I'd like to respond is, what is the objective in using such a tool in the context of response measures? Second, I give you some examples. I think this is the most important for you to understand how the tool works. And then I conclude with the policies that can be guided by the results. So the objective is pretty simple. I have it here from the International Energy Agency. We aim the world to become net zero 2050, and we want to understand what is the impact of such a transition plan on employment, on poverty, on inequality, on economic growth, gross domestic product, on any of the other SDG indicators. Right? So here we are looking at the social impacts, or we call the employment and the social impacts of the energy or the climate transition. And the objective, again, let me stress that, is to design, I think Peter mentioned it, we want to maximize the positive gains and we want to minimize the negative impacts. That is the overall objective. Now, more specifically, we need to now disentangle the different type of impact. So first, we talk about direct and indirect jobs, and in fact also induced jobs. Very quickly, the direct jobs, if you're not familiar with the terminology, are those that directly work in industry. Think of coal mining. No, these are the coal miners. But then the indirect jobs are those that work in the canteen of the company that does the coal mining. The induced job are those jobs in the cinema. The coal miner earns money. He spends it not only in the canteen, which is directly or indirectly related to the coal mine, but in the evening takes his or her family to the cinema. If this income ceases to exist, also the cinema will face some impact. On the other hand, if you gain additional income in, say, solar or any of the green industries, it will create and stimulate additional activity. So we need to measure both the direct, the indirect, and the induced impacts to have a picture of the economy and not only to look at specific sectors only. Then there's not only jobs, but at the ILO, you know, we distinguish jobs. There are informal jobs, jobs in poverty. We need to estimate underemployment and unemployment in addition to the decent work conditions of the jobs lost or the job gains. Skills are of utmost importance in the transition planning. You open any country's media, you will find skills challenges now after the pickup of the economies, not to be in Europe, etc. The transition requires new skills, which may not be in the labor market. We need to understand where. This is the social and the labor market dimension, but ministries of finance are often more concerned with GDP growth rate. No? So we need to understand what is the impact of these climate policies on GDP, and not only aggregate, but by sector, and the feedback on demand. This is what I had mentioned with induced jobs. If income decreases, there's no feedback on demand in the economy and GDP slows. Tax revenues, income for oil exporting, gas exporting countries, that is of utmost importance to understand the implications. And then we need to match all this with the environment. CO2 emissions by sector are key, because the ultimate objective, as we know, is to bring emissions down to net zero. So basically, we have these three kind of data sets: the social dimension, the economic dimension, and the environmental dimension. For that, the Green Jobs Assessment Model provides a data frame. At its core, it's an empirical model which combines all these data sources. I put them here just in terms of the guidelines. The system of national accounts provides for GDP and macroeconomic figures. The system of environmental economic accounting provides for the environmental dimension, including the IPCC environmental assessment, emissions, and then the labor force surveys and the household budget surveys to look at inequality. So to combine all these data sources, Leontiev won the Nobel Prize in '74 for his input-output data frame, called it supply and use table in the United Nations language. Here you see in a snapshot what that looks like. You can combine all these data sources in satellite accounts in a data frame. I will not go into the technical details of the model. You provide some exogenous accounts like population growth, global economic development, because each and every country is obviously linked to the global economy and the population growth rates. And then you have obviously investments from the past and consumption from the past, that is GDP per capita. And you denominate this data framework to make projections on employment by industry and emissions by industry, which will give you the direct effects, the indirect effects, and the induced effects of these climate policies. We have 1 week trainings to help people in government, in research institutions to learn about the model. It's coded in R. Here you see the screenshot. We'll see that later in the session in the afternoon. We'll work on one. This is just to give you an idea. The model uses historic data. From here on the screen, you see from the 70s up to 2030. That is now the NDC plan, for example. And you see the dotted points, which are the historical data, and you see the projections in the line. So basically, just for you to understand that the model projects certain policies, comparing those policies to a baseline scenario. The beauty of the model is that you have employment by sector. It's based on the International Standard Classification of Industries, ISIC. And here you see just the 43 sectors that are those sectors that all countries in the world submit to the United Nations Statistics Office in an international classification system. So you see in these labor projections, you always see where are job gains and where are job losses, and not only where they are, but you can also quantify those in terms of number. So just give you an example, recently concluded work we are doing with the Ministry of Finance in Mauritius. Unfortunately, I cannot see Mauritius at the table here, although I had thought they are part of Asia and Pacific, but yeah, whatever. So let me just pick one of the examples. The data are quite a lot from these models, so you need to focus on what you want to analyze. So here I just pick the skills requirements because that is in the work of Mauritius is very important. They are looking at the skills impact in their NDCs. So they have a reduction target similar to other countries, I believe, in the region of 30% reduction compared to the baseline. And we plotted these 30% reduction in CO2 emissions by sector in the different areas, in the different industries. And here I show you the skills requirements by sector. So first have a look at top left, agriculture. You see there are very few managers that are required. It's basically transition to climate smart agriculture, agriculture that is adapted to the new climate conditions. And you need very little managers. That is the structure of the economy in Mauritius. However, you need quite, if you look at ISCO classification, that is the International Standard Classification of Occupations, 6, skilled agricultural and fishery workers. Fishery is an important sector, the blue economy. You see 6,000 new skilled professionals are required, 6,000. So for a country of 1 million in Mauritius, that's quite a lot, and the training system needs to adapt. So these figures are really gold for the Ministry of Education because they now do understand if we are serious with our NDC plan, we would need to provide in the next 8 years, we need to provide 6,000 skilled agricultural and fishery workers. Now look at the bottom, tourism. Tourism, Sanji mentioned it, Asia Pacific heavily relies on tourism, including Bangkok area and Thailand. So tourism, there's a label, Green Globe. In Mauritius, we look at energy efficiency in hotels with labels such as Green Globe to make energy net zero energy targets in hotels. And here you need a lot of more managers as compared to agriculture. And you can count them. This is the first ISCO classification 1, 2,300 managers, because it's obviously managers who take the decisions in hotels, who do the investments and so forth. No? So if you have to train managers, then it requires a different development of a curricula. You need to talk to different universities and faculties to introduce those curricula to make this transition happen. So here, this is where I say it is useful for policymakers because you may not be interested in the tool. However, in terms of policy making, this is gold for those ministries who are involved in the transition planning. So just to conclude with one last policy relevant, you can, Sanji mentioned it, you can talk a lot, but if you don't have the support of Ministry of Finance and budget, you'll go nowhere. No? So you can scale the investments required to $1 million invested or $1 invested. What is the bang for the buck? Right. So where can you maximize? Now that was my first slide or second slide. Where can you maximize job gains and minimize the losses? No, so you can use this type of analysis to say, okay, $1 invested, where does it give me most employment creation and most emission reductions? So employment gains are in red, emission reductions are in blue. So on the negative, you see obviously the emission reductions from these NDC policies, and in red, you see the job gains in the different sectors or losses. Now, if you look at the highest number of employment, then trees planting is very high in terms of job creation, 300. However, they're short term, right? So this you need to understand, and with the analysis, you do understand for how long these jobs are. So you create 300 jobs per $1 million invested if you plant trees. In renewable energy sources, it's half. It's 150, but they are long term, and they require obviously different skill set. Now on the middle chart, you see one sector that loses jobs. This is an analysis from Nigeria. Job losses occur in cook stoves. Job losses are heavily concentrated not in oil and gas. We may think of a petro state. Nigeria is not a petro state, it's a wood state. 70% of primary energy comes from wood. Oil and gas is exported. There are close to 750,000 jobs in charcoal production. 750,000 jobs in charcoal production. In my home country, Germany, we have 20,000 coal miners left. They have 50,000. So if you're serious in reducing deforestation, and I can imagine it's similar to countries with high deforestation rates, such as Indonesia or others, that there are quite a number of employment that are directly or indirectly impacted. So if you think of just transition policies, you find the cook stove alternative obviously reduces the amount of charcoal required and thereby reduces the number of charcoal producers in the forest. So what do we do with those jobs? Right. So this is just an example to showcase on how this tool can be used to give relation to different sectors, because oil and gas, again, does not even feature on this chart because there are 60,000 jobs in Nigeria in oil and gas only. So it's a very small number for a population of 200 million people. Right. So these employment assessments provide you also a scale on where the hotspot is in terms of just transition policies. And here in Nigeria, it is not oil and gas, but it is charcoal. So let me just conclude with the example we'll work on this afternoon. Here you see the chart that you'll provide this afternoon. We'll have a session where you will develop your own scenario. We'll work with an existing model that we just recently launched in Ghana. We had hoped that Angelina from the KCI, those who know her, will join. That's why we selected Ghana. But it doesn't matter. It's just an exercise we'll do where you will work on some climate policies and we will plot them into the model and you will see the results. So the exercise I'll explain in the afternoon, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Marek. This was very, very helpful and interesting to listen, especially the gains and losses of $1. That was very, very interesting to look at it in this manner. We now move to our last presenter in this session, which is to Terapong from ESCAP. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kusum. And yeah, my name is Terapong from ESCAP Statistics Division. All the presenters make my job a lot easier because I don't need to convince anyone of the importance of evidence. And thanks our colleagues on bringing out a lot of basic guidance and guidelines that we would need. So my today themes will be integration, coherence, and partnership. So let's start. So we are working in a country context where we want to meet many objectives. So we want sustainable development. We definitely want clean and blue economy. We want to make sure that we can withstand this as a risk. We want to make sure that we work towards our low emission economy. We also want to maintain and preserve our biodiversity and ecosystems. So our decisions become more integrated. And this is the concept of the nexuses, and for everyone who definitely work on this area. So when the easy definition would be, you can't really change one thing without changing the other. In other words, impact on one sector would have the consequences to many other sectors. And we have to also make decision. Are we going to develop our country, or should we conserve our country? Or where exactly do we want to develop? Which sector we want to prioritize? Is it for long-term or short-term benefits, and who benefits anyway? So these questions would need data to help us shape our mind and decision. The issue would be all this data, if we focus on climate change, are produced by many agencies in your country. It's not coming from one single institution. So they are very fragmented. If I ask everyone how often you talk to your government colleagues in your system, so that would be the answer. It's very fragmented. We also know that in our system, we have a group of officials collecting all the data, but so far in our history, the priority has been on economic and social statistics, much less so on environmental statistics, or very little that we thought about climate change related information. So these are the challenge. And if based on what we just discussed, so we have three common group of people. We have policy people who make decisions. We have official statistics colleagues who collect all the data. We also have scientific community who always bring about new evidence. Now, in the conversation, and I'm part of this conversation a lot. So policy people will ask, what do you have? Then statistician will say, and what do you want? And I have this always kind of recurring questions. What do you have? What do you want? What do you have? Do you want? Then you're blocking the dialogue. Then you have the scientific community to say, and what do you need to know? So I can do for you, but tell me what exactly you need to know. If we keep this conversation going, we would end up with the data graveyard. The data that you are collected will not get used. So you spend a lot millions of dollars in your tax revenue for collecting data that they never get used. You might end up with very confused policy making, or you might wonder why your policy strategy and implementation wouldn't bring about the change you expect, because it might not be based on the correct evidence. Then very good scientific evidence might be sitting in the ivory tower, never get used anyway. So how do we change this group's mindset? How we bring them to think differently? So if we engage in dialogue, policy people may ask, what we have the problems in our country. So how can we solve the problem? Then official statistics will say, how can we help? We have a lot of tools in our system, but exactly how can we help? Then we would like to engage. We have a lot of data collection schemes that we can maybe inform your decisions. Yeah. Then scientific people will say, hey, we have done this new work. This is what you should know. This might be useful for you. If we start engaging in the dialogue, then I think there are better chance for us to be informed by trusted evidence. And we will talk a lot more about models. Perhaps sometimes the problems are not about the models, it's about the data behind the models that's not of quality. So the models doesn't bring about good results because data behind them are not of quality. So where to start then? So we are in the global climate journey. So no country can work alone. Right? So in that sense, the evidence that we say has to be concrete. They have to be multidimensional. I think we come to the realization already that working in silos wouldn't change the system. So working in isolation would only bring bad things to our system going forward. And at some point in our journey, we would like to make sure that we combine our efforts at a global stake. Say, are we meeting our global commitments? That means all the data that you are collecting, using, has to somehow be comparable. Otherwise, you're going to add oranges and apples and peach, and then we don't know if we are meeting 1.5 degree commitment or not, because we are measuring totally different things, but just call the same thing. So we are talking about all aspects of climate change. We want to understand drivers and impact. We want to understand the population, social, environmental, economic vulnerability. We understand how to address or measure our mitigation and adaptation measures. We also want to understand social and economic implications of our climate policy, make sure that no one is left behind. So we're talking about just one example. If we think of the energy sector, are we promoting more energy poverty? Are we actually increasing urban-rural divide? Are we widening the gender gaps? Which social groups and economic groups that are most impacted towards our low emission economy? So all these questions, all these important policy questions, would be answered by actually very basic data. So some good news. You're not alone. Trust me, you are not alone. Everyone had the same challenges, just different in different context. So internationally, you're sitting in this kind of platform that we can learn from each other. We can exchange our experience and problems. Problem of one country might already be solved by another country. Then promoting a dialogue in this group of country would make a lot of sense. And also inside your country, you're never alone. You have a lot of your peer colleagues in different government institutions, your universities, and your private sector who always would like to make sure that your country move ahead in a way that we all wish it be, right? And there are a lot of tools available, and I'm not going to read all of them. But these are just maybe for your references. We have the global set of climate-related statistic indicator that head of your states, head of your national statistical offices already agreed upon. So all countries know if you want to measure yourself towards a climate objective, what are basic underlying data that you might want to have in your system. We can't not talk about disasters when it comes to climate change impact. So that there's a framework to help you measure your progress and also which sector actually impact most from the disaster impact, how much you actually spend in saving lives. Does that actually make a difference in your system if the next typhoon comes, the next earthquake comes, right? Are we investing enough in your early warning system? Would that be effective? We also have the basic framework for general environmental statistics. We have system national accounts that tells us about the GDP. We have the SIA that tells us about interaction between the economy and the environment. We have the international recommendations for energy statistics that actually guides us a lot how we would combine and compare our energy data globally, so that we actually compare like to like. A lot of data already exists in your system. And again, I'm not going to read all of this. We have population. It seems maybe irrelevant in climate discourse, but if you actually start working with the models, start working with your colleagues, your system, you would need population census, you would need civil registration versus system, business registers, economic surveys, SNA, input-output tables. You would need labor force surveys. You would need other social surveys. You need your energy balance and GHG inventory, some CI accounts. You need to tap into this possibility of spatial analysis, field monitoring, a lot of data that are collected, then a lot more in the system. We are not lack of data. The question would be, how would you bring them? How would you integrate them together in partnership with your colleagues in your country? Another, maybe the last good news here, every country has an NSO. You don't need to know all of this because your NSO already knows a lot of this. Then working together, combine your strengths and engage in a dialogue. We have a problem. How can we solve it? And the NSO will say, yeah, we have all these standard data collection schemes. How can we enhance it to inform your question, right? Just very one concrete example. If your climate policy and strategy want to monitor changes or look at the progress of very specific job categories or economic sectors, countries collect labor force surveys. They're based on job classification. Every country has their economic census, agricultural census, or basic business registers that follow standard international industrial classification. There are job categories. There are sector economic sector categories. If you don't engage in a dialogue with your NSO and you don't tell them exactly which sector you want to monitor, they might not be in the questionnaire. Then they might not get asked. There will be no data for you. So this concrete example is engage with NSO. This is the particularly category, the job that we want to measure, the sector that we want to monitor. Engage NSO how we can bring this about in that regular data collection. This does not take a lot of money. Does not take a lot of time because this is their business to do anyway. So thank you very much. I hope this is helpful. And yeah, ESCAP is here to assist all the countries specific in moving ahead in this journey. And welcome any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tharapong. I really enjoyed this presentation as well. While in a very, very simple manner, you presented the challenges, the way we should work, and also enlightened us with some good news as well. So moving forward, as we are very, very short of time, we are running behind it. So what we will do is just a quick 5 minutes we will take for any burning questions we have. Otherwise, rest of the questions we will expect that you can also ask during our breakout group sessions because you'll be having ample amount of time and we all are present here in this room. So if there is anything which cannot really wait, I would open the floor for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arif from Malaysia. Maybe the same questions to Mr. Malik and Ms. Sangji. Regarding the use of modeling tools pertaining to the NDC and also to quantify, the jobs creations or the just transition things. Is it necessary to use the a kind of advanced model, the things like the Jagan-like times model or the LEAP model or things like that, optimization models? Is it just sufficient to practice the accounting model, the Excel or whatever? That the spirit is, if it works, and that's it. The modeling tools is tools to quantify or to help us to do the decision making. Yep, I appreciate your thought.
Yeah, no, thank you. Not sure if I 100% got the question. I do understand the selection of a tool, what type of tool you select and how it should help you then in decision making. Maybe the tool that I had presented is not an optimization model. It is called a structural simulation model. So the idea is not that you optimize anything, or you want to achieve anything, but the idea is that you have a baseline economic development based on historic data, and then you policymaker, you decide what to analyze. So if you look at transport and say we want to reduce emissions from the transport sector by 50% by 2030, then you use a scenario to compare the baseline economic development to your scenario. So it is a projection and not a provision, or a weather forecast. No, we are not talking about a weather forecasting model, because we don't want to forecast anything. We make a scenario planning. What if you put in this? Then most likely this will be the outcome. No, so it is a tool, and in that sense, we say our objective is not to provide a study, but is to your country, in case of Malaysia is interested, to provide you with a tool so you can use it as a ministry for alternative policy planning, and you see the outcome. Right? So the idea is really, you could also do the opposite. If you want to increase oil and gas production, the tool shows you job gains and losses. No, so you can use it as an informative guide to scenario planning. Yeah, that is the idea. Not sure if that answered the question.
Give opportunity to Sangji to complement.
Thanks, Kusum, and thanks for the great question. So I am also not 100% sure if I have captured your question, but if it's about, the comprehensiveness of the model, right? As our colleague from the ASCAP has mentioned, it really depends on the data behind it, right? As he mentioned, the data is usually not very available, tends to be very outdated, and the intergovernmental collaboration to get different data is not necessarily easy. So you need to be very critical as a policymaker or as a user of the model. That's why I've mentioned that it has to be accompanied by the entire stakeholder processes. The model is there to answer your questions, and if the policymakers are there in the beginning of this assessment, then they can ask the right questions. And what we do also together with the ILO, we usually, before we start any modeling assessment, we do a scoping study. So scoping allows us to understand, define a realistic scope of the assessment. I know the government usually wants the model to answer everything, but it is impossible. So you need to be very selective what kind of indicators that you want to look at, whether the data is available in the country. So that kind of process is also helping to enhance the credibility of the model. And also the statisticians and the modelers have a responsibility to clearly indicate what were the assumptions made behind the model. Model is all based on the assumptions, and also explain the limitations of this model so that it is not leading the wrong policy implications. So thanks for the great question.
Okay, this is probably the last question I will take, and then we can follow up later, please.
Well, thank you so much. Yani, it's a question or remark. Yani, thank you, Sanji, for what you've said, but also we would like some more communication between UNDP and the entities itself. Sometimes even country offices of UNDP, they do not so well aware of the UNDP programs all over the world. This is something, so much more communication would be great. Mark, although you are a labor organization, first of all, welcome from Geneva, and I wish you had a good plane flight. So the matter is that when we are talking about just transition, always we are talking about jobs. We are talking about what might affect the jobs. But did ILO or any other organization talked about, let's say, the the affection of the CPAM, which will begin to be implemented at the beginning of 2024. So sometimes there is some covered unemployment or some covered poverty. Most of developing countries, they are relying sometimes on the European market, which will be affected once the Green Deal or the Green Deal Pacts is implemented to them. So when you reduce the amount of or the overall revenue of any sector in developing countries, this will also won't be just for them to keep in those sectors. So are there any kind of communication, any kind of studies, analysis for that? Thank you.
Do anyone want to respond to that?
Yeah, maybe if the do I get it right? You're asking about the cross-border impact.
It's the carbon adjustment mechanism.
Yeah.
So as an example, we do export agriculture goods, agriculture processed products to Europe. If they began now within that implementation for all, and we are banned to go there, or we have the carbon taxation or the fees which can our product can be competitive in the market, this will affect whomever who works within those products
So
in
we have
developing countries.
Obviously it needs 1 week training to understand the basics of the model, but in it's a macroeconomic model, so you have imports and exports. So I have shown you very briefly that